Hello, my name is Isaac Lowe. Today I will be presenting my Site 492 group research study, which will be focused on individuals' intention to engage in cardiovascular exercise. This presentation will go over my group research based on finding individuals' intention to engage in cardiovascular exercise 3 times a week for 60 minutes. We will first go over the introduction and literature review, then move on to the methods section, and then we will conclude the presentation with the results and discussion sections. To begin, we're going to look over this diagram based on the theory of planned behavior and reasoned action approach, which helped me find the different variables that cause intention to cardiovascular exercise. The primary goals of theory of planned behavior are to predict and understand behaviors through testing behavior control. This diagram demonstrates how these different variables coordinate with one another to predicting an intention. Behavioral attitude is the evaluation of personally performing the behavior. Perceived normative pressure or subjective norms is the perceived social pressure to engage in the behavior. And the PBC or perceived behavioral control is the perceptions of one's ability to perform a behavior. Intention is determined by attitude and normative pressure and influenced by PBC. Behavior is the functions of PBC and intentions and is a primary determinant of any given behavior that is influenced by attitudes, subjective norms, and PBC. Now let's begin getting into discussing the topic. My topic was using the theory of planned behavior to predict the intentions of individuals who engage in cardiovascular exercise 3 times a week for 60 minutes. Cardiovascular exercise includes activities such as biking, running, walking, swimming, aerobic exercise, and many more. Why is cardiovascular exercise important? Well, a quote from Warburton, Nicole, and Breeden states how physical inactivity is a modifiable risk factor for cardiovascular disease and a widening variety of other chronic diseases, including diabetes, mellitus, cancer, obesity, hypertension, bone and joint diseases, and depression. Next, we'll start going into prior research. Got in 1994 had explained that intention and behavior had an average of 0.55 of the variability in behavior and was explained by intention alone. 30% of the variation in intention to exercise was explained by the attitudinal component. In a more recent article published, Hager had findings that increased the previous statistic above to find intention was 41 through 46% of the variance in physical activity. Hasselblatt had supported the statistic above by doing a summary study of 60 physical activity studies and suggested that more than half of the variance in exercise can't be explained by exercise intentions. Also discovered was Gardner in 2011, who did a recent meta-analysis on the relationship between habit strength and health behavior relationship, where they found that habits have a similar relationship to intentions, like effect and self-efficacy. Self-efficacy expands on the idea of perceived behavior control and how well an individual can perform an activity. Now let's move on to the purpose of the study and the hypothesis. The purpose of the study was using the theory of planned behavior, where we were able to examine the different attitudes, perceived normal pressure, and PBC to find an individual's intention to engage in cardiovascular exercise 3 times a week for 60 minutes. My hypothesis was it is predicted that attitude, perceived normal pressure, and PBC will have significant prediction to the intention of cardiovascular exercise, with PBC being the most significant over attitude and normative pressure being the least significant predicting intention. Now we're going to move on to the methods section. To begin, we're going to look at the participants that were involved in the survey. There was a total of 38 participants. 22 accounted for were males, and 16 were females. Participants' age ranged from 18 to 98 years old, with a mean of 31.1 and standard deviation of 17.4. Most of the participants were non-Hispanic white, accounting for 26, and 10% were African American. Now for the procedure section, I will go over the recruiting process, purpose statement, and demographics. Study was conducted through a group of Psych 492 students at Ball State University. Participants followed a hyperlink using social media platforms and SMS messages. Participants were informed of all consent procedures and steps to maintain confidentiality. Participants were given 34 questions to answer the measured attitude, perceived normative pressure, and perceived behavior control in regard to cardiovascular exercise for 1 hour 3 times a week. They were then asked to fill out a demographic section regarding their age, sex, and race/ethnicity. Moving on to the measures and debriefing, participants completed an informed consent and questionnaire over cardiovascular health and exercise. They were given a description of the survey and contained basic guidelines of what will be questioned. Each set of questions were rated using a 7-point Likert scale. For questions measuring attention, participants responded to a 10-item design to measure their intention to engage in cardiovascular exercise and their behavioral beliefs towards the activity. One example being, for me, engaging in 1 hour of cardiovascular exercise at least 3 times a week is being rated from 1 being necessary and 7 being unnecessary. These attention items were averaged and displayed higher scores, illustrating greater intentions to engage in the activity. The reliability was 0.86. The next set of questions regarded towards the PBC and had 8 items listed on the survey. Examples of PBC questions were engaging in 1 hour of cardiovascular exercise at least 3 times a week is blank, under my control, and were rated 1 being not at all and 7 being completely in control. The reliability analysis measured PBC at 0.75. Next, we have 7 items that were focused around measuring intention. Intention had the highest reliability index at 0.91, and examples of questions included, I intend to engage in 1 hour of cardiovascular exercise at least 3 times a week, rating 1 definitely true and 7 definitely false. Another example is, I will make an effort to engage in 1 hour of cardiovascular exercise 3 times a week, rating 1 strongly agree and 7 strongly disagree. Lastly, we have 9 questions revolving around measuring the perceived normative pressure, which involves the participant being affected by environmental and social factors. Perceived normative pressure scored a 7.73 on the reliability analysis. Here are some examples. Most people I respect and admire engage in 1 hour of cardiovascular exercise at least 3 times a week, and it was rated 1 being unlikely and 7 being likely. Moving on to the debriefing, participants were then provided with a debriefing statement to illustrate the purpose of the study and how it was measured the attitudes and beliefs about engaging in cardiovascular exercise and how it is related to physical and mental health. It was then mentioned that the American Heart Association recommends at least 150 minutes of physical exercise a week. Presented in front of you is Table 1, showing the descriptive statistics and bivariate correlations. Initial inspection of these results indicated that the mean for perceived normative pressure, attitude, PBC, and intentions were all favorable towards engaging cardiovascular exercise. The mean attitude, PBC, and intention were significantly high and closely correlated with one another. Now we have Table 2, which summarizes the multiple regression for variables predicting intentions. I had used the standardized estimate to help me find the variable with the strongest predictor of behavioral intention. Half of variability by the model was accounted for and behavioral intention at r squared equals 0.5. Come to find out, none of the predictors were statistically significant and were all above p-value. PBC became the closest to being statistically significant at 0.06. For this part of the presentation, I'll be walking you through the discussion section, where we will begin talking about the summary of our results and tying it into previous research. As all of the variables were closely correlated with one another, PBC had the highest significance within correlation. It was found that attitude, perceived normal pressure, and PBC were all not statistically significant, as the p-value was higher than 0.05. The mean of PBC, attitude, and intention were all significantly high, with perceived normal pressure being the least. Going into the consistent with prior research, Hager and fellow researchers have found that 41 through 46% of the variance was from intention, as Hasselblatt had supported these results, stating that more than half the variance in exercise can't be explained by intentions. This is consistent with the data found within the variance of intention in my data, as half the variability was accounted for at 0.5. Now, we're going to go through the limitations of the survey, strengths, and suggestions for research in the future. A strength that was found of the study was choosing a topic of interest that many people can relate to on a day-to-day basis. Another strength was using the theory of planned behavior to outline people's intentions with variables to get consistent and reliable results. A weakness in the study found was the limited time to gather participants to effectively have a large sample. With that being said, over half of my sample that was gathered did not complete this survey. Many participants had commented on the questions being too repetitive and had lost interest quickly. For future research, I would like to gather a larger sample with a more diverse audience, as well as I'd like to reach out to participants sooner and have more time using a wider basis of platforms. Next time, I would like to experiment with incentives with getting more participants involved, possibly by using compensation. We have now reached the end of my presentation. I thank you for your time and hope that you have learned something new about cardiovascular exercise and using the planned behavior theory to help incorporate and understand behaviors.